Good afternoon. I'm Frank, one of the tour guides here at the Kentucky Railway Museum. Let's take a virtual tour of the museum building right this way. And when we step into our left, the first item that we see is this freight station. This would have been the scales that would have been in one of the freight stations throughout the railroads. This came from a donor in Henderson, Kentucky. And then as you look straight ahead in front of us, you see all of these several Buddy L trains that are pre-war, 1920s, 30s, and 40s. Obviously, these are not motorized. These are pieces that children would have ridden on and used their feet as a propulsion. As we step down along the model railroad, you see an HO scale layout that was actually donated by a very good friend of the museum, along with displays that had already been here in the museum, and everything was put together. And actually it's about 3 layouts that have been worked well together to make everything flow as well as it does. As the model railroad goes down along this wall, we see a picture of a dining car on the Pan American, the Lnn's crack passenger train. This would have been right before the war. Obviously, you can see there is seating for one person on the left-hand side, 2 people on the left-hand side of the coach, and tables for 4 on the opposite side. And we see one of the waiters and the steward pictured there in the picture as well. We next have a picture of the family arriving at Union Station in Louisville, coming off one of the L&N's Pine Series Pullman coaches. The red cap helping the folks with the luggage would be just comparable to what help you would see in the airports today as far as folks helping you with your luggage if you needed assistance. We keep on walking down this wall, and now we see this great big collection of railroad right-of-way signs. The picture of the sign at the very top is the Baxter Avenue passenger station, which would have been on the east end of Broadway in Louisville. And then you see the Clag sign, which is from the Pennsylvania Railroad Bridge in Louisville, along with the other signs that would have been used along the right-of-way of the railroad to give the operating crews instructions on what they needed to do next. Next picture we see overhead is a picture from the tower, which would have been just east of the Bourbon Stockyards in Louisville. Train that you see coming in would be arriving from Cincinnati. The tower operator would throw switches that would either send this train downtown to Union Station or possibly south toward Strawberry Yard, going on down through Central Kentucky into Bowling Green into Nashville. We get to the opposite end of the model railroad display, and you see the handiwork that a lot of our volunteers have spent hours in detailing this replica of Bean Mountain in Virginia that the L&N regularly traveled through with his coal trains. And then the next item we see, obviously, is the coal mine, the villages along the side of the railroad, and the smaller trains that would have operated carrying coal from the mountains to those other areas. We next look above us and we see a collection of railroad lanterns. from various railroads. All of these would have been coal oil and would have had to have been attended to every night before they could be used for the next day's operations. As you look to the wall here ahead of us, you see the message board from Union Station in Louisville, giving us information on the arrival and departure times of trains from both north and south. This was all of the Lnn trains, along with the Monon Railroad's thoroughbred, the South Wind, which was operated by several railroads that came through Louisville. You would also see the C&O Kentuckian there at the very top of the Pennsylvania Kentuckian as it came in from the north and east. We see a picture of the erecting shop of the locomotive department at South Louisville. This is taken in 1927. And if you're not familiar with where South Louisville shops were, today's location would be the location of the football stadium for the University of Louisville. You see overhead crane there lifting one steam locomotive above the other two sitting there in the picture. Gives you a very good idea of just exactly how massive the shops were, because the railroad built a lot of steam locomotives right here just to the south of downtown Louisville. We next look at the head of an M1 steam locomotive. Obviously, this is a locomotive that would have been carrying and pulling the various railroads' heaviest freight trains. This is a Stoker Fed Locomotive. You see it in the center of the picture. The engineer would have been seated on the right, the fireman on the left, and the fireman was in charge of making certain they had plenty of coal in the firebox and plenty of water in order to give the locomotive enough pressure to operate, both as far as steam is concerned and the airlines as well. Here that represents one of the very most important people on the railroad, and that was the watchmaker. Because every day as they went to work, the conductors and the engineers, everyone on the operating crew had to make certain that their clocks, their watches was absolutely right. And those watches had to be taken to the watchmaker twice a year in order to make certain that they were operating as they properly needed to be. One of the probably lesser well-known secrets of the railroad is that the railroads were very important in the formation of time zones, which helped get trains across the country without having a whole lot of accidents. As we look here at this wall, we see a number of paintings and photographs of various steam locomotives. Obviously the Pacific in the center there, the 462 locomotive there in the center. And then on the bottom we see the picture of the yellow and black Alco diesel locomotives that were used in eastern Kentucky pulling the coal trains. We come now to the photograph here of the Caboose, the conductor's office, home away from home. This is a typical Caboose with the desk here for the bookkeeping portion of the train ride, and then obviously to the to the left, you see the chimney from the stove that was in the Caboose. I'm certain there's plenty of beef stew and hot coffee on more than one occasion. And then obviously the cupola would have been just ahead of this gentleman, where the rear brakeman and the conductor would have sat to observe the operation of the train as they moved toward their next destination. Here in this case, we see a collection of locomotives, passenger equipment. Most of this is HO and O gauge locomotives that were used by the various railroads. Particularly of note is the GG1, the 4913 Pennsylvania locomotive, and there's also a smaller Pennsylvania GG1 in the other portion of the display. We point out for you the train bulletin from Lebanon, Kentucky. This board was in the station there at Lebanon, and this is the board that would have given train information for all of the trains coming between Louisville, Lebanon Junction, New Haven, Lebanon, on over to Corbin, and it's going over as far as Greensburg as well. But this was the train bulletin board that hung in the station at Lebanon, Kentucky. When we first put together the displays here in the museum building, we wanted to tell the story of the humanity of the railroad, because the railroad is just a whole lot more than just locomotives, passenger cars, freight cars. Had it not been for all of the folks, a lot of the times behind the scenes doing all the hard work that they did, trains would have never gotten from point A to point B. This picture shows a track crew building a railroad. This picture is actually taken in southern Alabama. These gentlemen are hand laying the rail and the ties, tightening up the joints as they get this railroad ready to accept passengers and freight. And the piece we see in front of us is a hand car that would have been used by crews just like this one as they made their way up and down the railroad before the motorized motor car came along. This was very good for moving up and down the railroad. You just had to make certain of one simple thing, that you paid plenty of attention, because if you didn't and you busted your chin, it hurt. The Lnn Case we see here in front of us gives us a picture of the Lnn system as the tracks were throughout the central part of the United States, from Cincinnati down south to New Orleans, over west as far as St. Louis, over into the mountains of Virginia. Also pictured in this case are a group of track crew members from Dance Station, Kentucky. There is a large picture of the board of directors at one point in time for the railroad. And then there is also a picture of the sprawling Lnn South Louisville yards that we referred to, the South Louisville shops that we referred to earlier. Along with that, you see the number plate from 152. You see a picture of Mr. Drury hanging the lantern on the end of his passenger train. And you see also a collection of photographs and equipment that would have been used on the railroad. The conductor's hat, the doorknobs, the number plates from the passenger car, locomotives, and the M1 plate, along with the construction hat for the work crew. The hand cranked motor car that we saw just a second ago obviously was not large enough to have equipment as well, so this little trailer was pulled by this hand car, and it would have carried the equipment that they needed as far as rail drills and other equipment for fixing the railroad. And then we get into a display of additional track equipment, along with 3 examples of steam locomotive whistles. Obviously, the bigger they are, the louder they are, and by the same token, too, a very different tone from each one of these if we applied the steam to them as well. And you see this little velocipede, bicycle on the railroad. The messenger at the station would have used these in order to deliver messages up and down the railroad to the crews that might have been working in his area. This would not have been used for long trips. Obviously, this was just to take care of the company doctor on occasion and to deliver messages as well. Next, we see one of our freight wagons, obviously with a lot of product here on them. We see an old whiskey barrel. We also see a huge oil lamp from locomotive number 2199. Then we also see the electric lamp headlight from 1619. And of course, you recognize these old suitcases that all of us had to carry when we made a trip. As we stop here and look at the old Baxter Avenue Station train bulletin, we also stand in front of one of the typical benches that would have been in those passenger stations. In this instance, this was donated by the Frankfort and Cincinnati Railroad Club, and we also have others in the building as well. Thanks for stopping in to visit with us on this virtual tour of our museum building. We're sorry right now that we cannot welcome visitors. We just hope that that will change relatively soon. And at that point in time, we'd be tickled to see all of you come back and see us, visit with us again. Thanks for coming.